The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
How do you solve a problem like homelessness? Well, tonight we'll hear from 4 Ontario mayors on what they're doing and how they would like the province to help them do more. Also, crime is spiking in Southern Ontario, and we'll try to get a handle on why. That's all tonight on The Agenda. Back in the day, you might ask, where is homelessness a growing problem in Ontario? Today, it's the opposite. Where is it not a growing problem? Municipalities are spending increasing amounts, sometimes with provincial assistance, but often not, to combat the problem. Joining us now to discuss some potential solutions to homelessness in Ontario, we welcome, in order of population size, Josh Morgan. He is the Mayor of London. Marianne Mead Ward, she is the Mayor of Burlington. Dorothy McCabe, she is the Mayor of Waterloo. And Joe Preston, he is the Mayor of St. Thomas. And I want to start, you know what, we're going to start with the smallest city. The big cities get all the attention all the time. So Mayor Preston, we're going to start with you. St. Thomas, Ontario, 50,000 people. Do I read this right? You have reduced over the last few years homelessness by 1/3. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is correct. We've been recognized under the Built for Zero plan to have made some very good inroads in addressing homelessness in St. Thomas.
How have you done it?
Well, it's about gathering everybody together. I know that every municipality has been working on a housing crisis, we want to call it, across the board. And we just said we have to have a council that wants to fix it and a group of community support that also wants to play the role in how to do it. It seems to be working. It takes time, and it takes the effort to get started and keep going at it.
Mayor McCabe, if you don't mind, would you take, just before I ask you my first question, a few steps backwards so we can see the whole slogan on your shirt?
Oh.
There we go. Okay. Solve the crisis. I was at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario annual conference a couple of weeks ago, as I'm sure all of you were, and I saw those T-shirts a lot. What does that refer to?
So Solve the Crisis, I mean, first of all, it's a website that any of your listeners can go to, and there's some advocacy tools there to let your local member of parliament, provincial and federal parliament, know that that we need their support, primarily through funding and some changes legislatively and with regulation changes. But this is a call to action from Ontario's big city mayors. Mayor Mead Ward is the chair of OBCM, and she can speak to it as well, but we're saying to the provincial and federal governments, we appreciate the funding that you've given us over the last couple of years. We need it, but this crisis has grown to such a significant extent that we need new funding tools, and particularly we need a point person at the province, in particular, a minister or a new ministry, where we can streamline our approach to it, because it's taking far too long to get programs in place or to make changes or to be nimble enough to make the changes that we know will work in our communities. So we're asking the provincial government to establish a standalone ministry, because right now we have to work across about 16 or 17 different ministries to get answers, to get funding, to get changes in programs. So it's cumbersome. We need to streamline it. So those are some of the highlights of Solve the Crisis. That again, Ontario big city mayors have launched this campaign in August. So we're seeing good pickup, and including we're really pleased to be talking about it here today, Steve.
Well, let me pick up with Mayor Mead Ward on that, because you similarly, I think last time I saw you, had one of those T-shirts on, and you were at the Bear Pit session where all 37, I think, cabinet ministers from the government of Ontario were there to take your questions. And I guess let me follow up on this right now, because you know. What you're trying to do, yes, the Minister of Health has a piece of it. The Minister of Housing has a piece of it. The Minister of Mental Health and Addictions has a piece of it. And I could go on and on. Why do you think creating one minister responsible for all of it would move the yardsticks by I guess some would say you're going to create an extra layer of bureaucracy and this won't help. So make the argument if you would.
People fall through the cracks. right now, and nobody can compel those upwards of 16 ministries to come together to take action. So it's a homelessness problem. It's a mental health and addictions problem, which is our health department. It's affecting tourism sector. We heard about a city that lost a major conference because the visitors that were checking out the city saw encampments in the downtown, didn't feel their participants would be safe. People are not coming to downtowns anymore because the businesses, people are camping in doorways of businesses. So this cuts across many different ministries, but there's no one person who has the authority to bring them all together or the resources to say we need to get this done. We need to take action. And, talk is cheap. We've been talking about this at the Ontario Big City Mayors Caucus for at least 3 to 4 years. We suggested some policy recommendations back in 2021, met with Minister Sylvia Jones at the time, brought with us members of the Chamber of Commerce, police, hospital sector, of course, members of our own caucus, to say this touches many different areas, but there's no one individual. And even though there's, this government for the first time appointed Michael Tabolo, Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, he has no funding and he has no authority to compel his colleagues to step up and get things done. So that's the first step that needs to take place. The second step is convene an action table. The solutions are out there in places like St. Thomas, places like London, Kingston. Municipalities have stepped up. Even though this is actually out of our jurisdiction in many respects, but we've stepped up and shown what works. Now we need the government to help us fund that, not only capital, but operating, so it can continue. And we also need to scale up because the need is massive. 1,400 encampments across Ontario in big and small cities, rural and urban.
That's an astonishing number. And Mayor Morgan, maybe I could bring you in at this point. You're the largest city represented here today, London, Ontario, 440,000 people. What are you doing that's working in London right now to attack homelessness?
One is we pulled the whole community together through a series of summits, which combines all the frontline service providers with city staff, the development community, the business community, emergency services. And we designed a system that was really designed around moving people from encampments into housing. And one of the steps along the way was a hubs-based system to help those with the highest acuity lower their acuity or move into the right type of housing for them. But ultimately, everything is geared towards housing and for those with the highest needs, supportive housing. We found that this is working exceptionally well with the 2 hubs that we've established, as well as the supporting housing units that we've brought up to speed. And we just can't scale it without support from other levels of government, which is the challenge. I'll give you an example. Within one of our supportive housing partnerships between London Cares, a homeless service agency, and our hospital system, LHSC, we have people in supportive housing who've been there for 6 months. And when we compare their consumption of emergency room services and land ambulance services, contacts with police, they are way down over the 6-month period beforehand. In fact, 81% fewer emergency room visits for the same population, 56% fewer days spent in hospital as an inpatient, 54% fewer instances of being admitted to a hospital, 63% fewer days in custody, 51% fewer interactions with police, people's substance use is way down. Like, we know that these are solutions that actually work. Our ability as municipalities to fund them and scale them is pretty much non-existent on a municipal tax base. And that's where this massive problem needs a whole of government approach where all levels of government are pulling in the same direction with the things that they can bring to the table. At the provincial level, that is operating dollars for these types of facilities. That is always the rate limiting factor for us. It has been all the way through. We can build capital, we can get capital, we can raise money in the community, but we cannot get the healthcare operating dollars we need, which is why the announcement the government made is a positive step in actually moving forward with something that we can access and then start to deploy.
Well, all right, let me pick up on that. This notion of, you referenced hubs there. Mary Ann Mead Ward, I'll pick up on that with you. The government at AMO, at the Municipalities of Ontario meeting that we were all at a couple of weeks ago, announced more than $370 million for what they call HART hubs, homelessness and addiction recovery treatment, HART hubs. What do you think those will achieve?
Well, that's great. For those communities that are getting that funding and for those residents that are able to access it, it will make a huge difference. But a funding announcement is not an action plan that solves it for the entire province. And what we've seen is when a hub opens in one community, people in the surrounding communities, if they don't have access to those services, will migrate. And so we have people moving around the province to follow the services and try to get the services. It's needed in every community across this province. And it really doesn't relate often to the size of the community. Right now, according to Kingston's numbers, they have more people living on the street, according to their records, than people in Hamilton, which is 2 to 3 times the size. And so, there is a need for action in every community. So we're grateful for the funding. We welcome the funding, but a funding announcement is not an action plan, which is why we need the government to appoint a single person, single point of contact who can convene that action table and build a plan that will solve this for all of Ontario simultaneously, and then be the model for the country, because this is a national problem. This is not just unique to cities and towns in Ontario.
So, Mayor Preston, the template clearly is there. You've given examples, all of you, of what you've been doing to try and improve things. Things are working in some areas. What is stopping you from scaling this up to make it province-wide?
Time. It just takes more time and effort to move forward. And the requested time of funding, whether as Mayor Morgan has said and as the others have shared, we can make a request to the provincial government or the federal government for funding, but it may be we're planning so far out for the project that we're talking about that it doesn't fix it today. And so we've got to keep this 18-month rolling plan going so that we can be asking for tomorrow's funding, for tomorrow's healthcare funding or supportive housing funding, while we solve today's issues with yesterday's funding. And so it really is about just staying active and keeping the community working well on it. We've been fairly successful with a by names list, knowing the names of the homeless in our community and many of them, and working with the highest acuity into supportive housing first so that we can solve the problem in a genuine way.
Mayor McCabe, I want our viewers and listeners to get a better understanding of why this is such a protracted and challenging issue for you folks. And to that end, I think people understand that property taxes, the tax base, goes to garbage pickup, goes to keeping your water pure, goes to, shoveling the roads in the wintertime, that kind of thing. Was it contemplated that the property tax base would also fund problems around homelessness, mental health, and addiction?
No, absolutely not. And that's one of the biggest challenges, particularly in our community. And our community, I'm the mayor of the city of Waterloo, but I'm here speaking more as in my capacity as a region of Waterloo councillor, because the region of Waterloo has the responsibility for housing, homelessness, public health, mental health, and addictions. And I can tell you that a few years ago, we used to spend approximately, in 2024, we invested about $245 million into affordable housing and homelessness, and that's about a third of the cost of the homelessness program. So we're putting about 22% of our property taxes into solving this problem. A few years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago, it was maybe 10% of our property tax levy. But the bottom line is the property tax system is not designed to take on and solve and fund chronic problems like this, chronic and complex problems like this. The property taxes were set up, as you said, for water and sewer services and roads and bridges and recreation programs and things of that nature. It was never designed to take on these kind of complex problems. And in Ontario, we're still the only province in Canada, province or territory in Canada, that has social housing that's been downloaded as a municipal responsibility. And again, the property, we need we've been calling for the federal and the provincial government for years. We've been asking them to have a fiscal and social policy review, because the property tax system, we can deliver the programs if we're, and you've heard great examples from my colleagues here of how we can make it work on the ground. We can deliver the programs. We know what will work in our communities, but we need that long-term operational funding, because from the feds and the province, and one of the great things that we know works is proactive measures and upstream measures. We can do that as municipal leaders and municipalities, but we need that long-term operating money from the feds and the province in order to do so.
So, Mayor Morgan, give us an indication of what a new deal for municipalities involving the other orders of government, what would that look like going forward if you had your way?
Well, first, it would involve less of a dependence on property taxes, which is a system that is 150 years old that was not designed to build modern cities with the complex challenges that we face. And we need to be connected to economic and population growth in some more meaningful way with funding tools. That would be very, very helpful to municipalities. One of the challenges we have is, as each of us contribute to the economy and we grow our cities, all of those economic growth revenues, whether they be income taxes or sales taxes, none of them come back to municipalities. They all go to other levels of government, and we don't actually see revenue growth with economic growth within our municipalities. And that's a challenge, because certainly the challenges grow as cities grow, the costs grow as cities grow, and a reliance on just solely property taxes or the good grace of other levels of government and the programs they put, or user fees, really just lands pretty much all of those costs on local taxpayers without the capacity to scale. And one of the things that I think we've been talking about here is municipalities have the ability to innovate. We can find solutions. We can deploy programs. We do not have the ability to scale those things for provincial-wide or national problems. That's what other levels of government do. And so we need the proper fiscal tools, but we also need leadership from other levels of government to take solutions that municipalities come up with and then broadcast them and share them across the entire province of the entire country, and allow a scale up of this to solve a problem like homelessness or mental health and addictions. These are not challenges that are unique to any individual city that we happen to be the mayor of. These are provincial-wide and national challenges that require that level of leadership and coordination as well.
Mayor Mead Ward, let me get you to follow up on that, and I'll introduce this little anecdote to set up the question. I think everybody well remembers when John Tory was the mayor of Toronto, he used to say how sick and tired he was of going, I think he said, cap in hand with short pants on up to Queen's Park to try to beg for more money to get done what he wanted to get done. Is there a better alternative as you consider a new deal for cities to allow you to take on these kinds of issues, besides constantly begging the other orders of government to give you more money?
Predictable, sustainable funding is what we need based on population and economic growth. The current model is we wait for a government announcement, a program to open. We read the criteria, hope we qualify. We submit an application. We wait for somebody at Queen's Park to review that application, find out whether we got some or all or none of what we've asked for, and then get the answer back. It is the definition of red tape. And this government cares a lot, they say, about cutting red tape. So cut that first. The gas tax is a perfect model for how we could move in a different direction. It is based on transit ridership. It is transparent. We don't have to line up and beg in short pants or short skirts to get the funding that our residents need. So get rid of the allocation program. That has been a discussion point, and there's some nervousness about it because it's not, what about the photo op? What about the government making the ability to make a big announcement and say we're doing something about whatever the issue of the day is? And you know what? We'll give you your photo op. We'll give you the credit and the kudos. We do that already with gas tax. Every time we get our allocation, we talk about the buses we're buying or the electric vehicle charger infrastructure that we're putting in. Happy to continue to do that with federal and provincial partners. But the way that cities are funded right now is backwards, hasn't changed, as you heard, in 150 years. And when this government talks about, and I'm talking about the provincial government, talks about the fact that they haven't raised taxes, it's because they've downloaded everything to us. and we're not going to let our people suffer as we fight over jurisdiction or funding models. We're just going to get in there and get stuff done. And that means we have, I can tell you in Halton Region, we subsidize provincial programs to the tune of $14 million every single year, because it is unacceptable to us to let our residents suffer while we sort out what really needs to change, which is funding model and policy pieces as well.
Quick follow-up here. Do you like dealing with Queen's Park?
I find them willing to listen to an argument if enough residents make enough noise. And so we hope that the solvethecrisis.ca campaign, also a website, as you heard, where residents can go to the page and write their own letter and their own thoughts. And it is targeted to your postal code. So I am getting many dozens of residents talking about their personal thoughts, their personal experiences, seeing people in the streets of our city, wondering how they're doing, wanting us to take action, and that gets copied to the Premier. Councils are also asked to pass a resolution at their local councils. We'll be doing that in Burlington and Halton Region. But at AMO, because this is where we launched the campaign just before AMO, I had police, fire, paramedics, tourism, business, mayors from other municipalities saying, how can I amplify and support this campaign? Because the time is now to act. The time for words is over.
This program, admittedly, is a bit notorious for getting into the weeds on various issues, and I guess I'll apologize in advance for doing that right now, because I'm going to ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, bottom of page 3, Sheldon, let's bring this chart up. Thank you. We're going to go through this, and for those listening on podcast, I'll just describe what we're seeing, which is a pie chart showing the percentage of funds allocated to community housing, homelessness, and supportive housing by the various orders of government. And the data covers 4 years between 2014 and 2018, which is apparently the most recent data available. And we see that the province is on the hook for 57% of those costs for those things: community housing, homelessness, and supportive housing. Municipalities for just over a quarter, and the feds are in for 17%. And I guess the question is, let's start with Mayor Preston on this one. What do those numbers say to you?
Well, it's a big cost factor, and as we've been saying, we probably need to re-examine how we're finding those funds municipally. It shouldn't be perhaps on the property owner's tax bill only, and so we need to establish, as that graph shows, the cost of solving this problem or reaching out and solving it in a substantial way, and say, is there another way we could do this? It looks like a fairly large issue that gets down to home in smaller and medium and larger municipalities.
So, Mayor Morgan, if we were going to create a system that worked better, however you want to define better, how would those numbers change?
Well, I think what you would do is you would define who is responsible for what components of the services that are being provided to the people of Ontario or the people of Canada. What should be provided and funded by city through property taxes, and what should be funded by provinces and federal governments. It's just a common sense approach to spending your finances. And I think what we've had over the number of decades and hundreds of years of a property tax system is just this creep of either downloading or uploading or tweaking around the margins without taking a real serious look at how is the best possible way to actually fund these things so that we can actually achieve the results that we all want to achieve. So, I would see that graph shift to reflect that municipalities really only have property tax, user fees, and then the dependence on levels of government to do everything that they're responsible to do. And everything that they've been responsible to do has been increasing over the time as cities have grown and become more complex. It's just not reflective of the reality of a modern city. I think a step back approach, a thoughtful analysis of who is doing what and how it is best funded to be as efficient as possible and provide the best possible service delivery would be a model that I think coming at the other end that we could all be proud of, and I think our common constituents would feel that they're getting great value for.
Well, let me raise the issue of constituents now with Mayor McCabe, and that is, again, I well remember Mike Harris back in the 1990s saying all the money's coming out of the same taxpayers' pockets. It may be allocated to different orders of government, but it's all coming from the same single taxpayer. So, Mayor McCabe, I appreciate the argument you're trying to make today. I wonder whether it falls on deaf ears of taxpayers who are just thinking to themselves, you're all after me for more of my money. I understand you want to solve problems, but I only got so much. How do you respond to that?
Well, and Absolutely. We understand that, and we know there's a real affordability crisis in our communities and certainly across Ontario and the province and globally as well. We understand that. But in issues like this that we've been outlining, certainly the provincial government and the federal government, they have a much more variety fiscal tools that they can use, and that certainly far exceeds what municipalities' ability. We, as Mayor Morgan just said, we have user fees, we have property taxes, and that's about it in order to raise revenue. The province and the feds can they can take on more debt. They have many more fiscal levers that they can pull. To support municipalities in doing this work. And I just wanted, just going back to that graph that you showed, one of the things that I think you said it's from 2018. I mean, that is far out of date in terms of how the property tax allocation is, at least in my community, because as I said, our property taxes in the region of Waterloo, there's about 22% of them are going to fund housing and homelessness issue and mental health and addictions issues. So that chart there is a few years out of date.
Well, this graphic here said 26%, so you're sort of in the neighborhood. Either way, it's too much, eh?
Oh, it's entirely too much. I mean, a few years ago, our property taxes were maybe covering maybe 10% of the homelessness and housing and mental health and addictions and of that nature. I mean, they really should be. These are programs that really should be funded with long-term operating funding from the province and the federal governments. And again, this is what the Solve the Crisis campaign and the call that municipalities have for years have asked for from the province and the federal government for the fiscal review that we need.
Okay, we're literally a few minutes to the end here, and I want to just get a couple of more things on the record if I can. Mayor Mead Ward, you've made both publicly and privately the call to the Premier and his government for this special minister in Cabinet responsible for the issue. What response did you get?
We got a funding announcement, which is very welcome, but a funding announcement's not an action plan. So we'll keep asking, and we have confidence that enough voices saying the same thing, and the momentum of the campaign has, it exploded beyond our expectations. And I think it's because people are saying enough. I care about the people on the street. I want governments to ask, don't care whose jurisdiction it is, and find a way to finance this properly. And it's interesting to note that even though we're paying 26%, and those are dated numbers, we get 9 to 10 cents on the dollar. Municipalities. Our hospitals are functioning as shelters. Our police are functioning as mental health workers. If we corrected the problem upstream, we would actually save money because of those resources being deployed to solve the crisis right now.
In which case, Mayor Preston, if we were to reconvene you say in 3 or 4 years' time, how confident are you that you will be able to say, here are the improvements we've made, and here's how we've been able to make them thanks to the wisdom of all those involved?
Well, I'm fairly confident we can carry on at the pace we're going. Will that solve the problem in a timely enough manner? We have citizens saying we need to solve problems like this quicker. And it's truly a financial issue with the other levels of government. I think we all know how to do it. It's getting the right direction and the right funding from the other levels of government to make sure it does happen, whether it's policing, or healthcare or housing itself. We have to all carry on the path. We can't ignore the crisis that's out there, and nor will we. But we're asking for help from the other levels of government, and perhaps not a bureaucratic help, but a financial assistance. We're doing some of the right things. Will you help us fund it?
Mayor Morgan, how about you on that question? If we reconvene you in a few years' time, what's our conversation going to be like?
I think we will have made progress. I think for the first time in a long time, we see all orders of government recognizing this for what it is, and that is a crisis, right? We may not agree on all the pieces yet, but we are united as mayors in the direction we need to go. We are engaging effectively and proactively with other levels of government, and they are recognizing that this is a crisis that they have to deal with. The funding announcement is an excellent signal to say we understand that we have to do something. Now, we're going to have conversations about how to make this as effective as possible and what actually needs to be done. But I'm very optimistic that we have three levels of government here who are all agreeing that this is absolutely something that needs to be dealt with. It is a crisis. Our residents are demanding action on it, and that we all agree that we're going to move forward together. And I think that gives me a lot of hope and optimism. We like Mayor Preston said, we know the solutions. Like Mayor Mead Ward said, we are aligned as mayors. We know the direction we want to go. We are coordinated, we are organized, and we are ready to play our part in solving this crisis. We need all levels of government to be involved.
Mayor McCabe, clearly with an eye to the visual, takes a few steps back to remind everybody of the slogan on her T-shirt. There we go. And we thank Joshua Morgan, the Mayor of London, Marianne Mead Ward, the Mayor of Burlington, Dorothy McCabe, the Mayor of Waterloo, Joe Preston, the Mayor of St. Thomas, for joining us on TVO tonight. Many thanks, you four.
Thanks very much, Steve.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
The Greater Toronto and Hamilton area is seeing a surge in violent crimes. Homicides, shootings, and carjackings are all up. This past Labor Day weekend saw 3 people killed in Ontario's capital city, including a 15-year-old boy. Jason Miller, crime reporter with the Toronto Star, joins us now to help us understand these very troubling events. First time on the program, we welcome you here, and we are looking forward to your helping us understand that when the Toronto police say that they are shocked by what's been going on, I assume it takes a lot to shock a Toronto police officer. So what's going on?
Absolutely. And to be frank, being a crime reporter, you do see this on a daily basis. So we're in somewhat more exposed to these numbers than anyone else, even the general public, because we do review and analyze them. And what we've seen in the last several years has been startling in terms of the spike in certain types of violent crimes, shootings, homicides, and not only that, the type of offenders that we're seeing in terms of suspects younger and younger, and that's becoming more and more troubling. And I think that's where you see police, the top brass, stepping out in front of this in York Region and in Toronto, doing some press conferences to address these issues because they know the public is becoming very concerned.
Okay, Jason, I know this is a daily thing for you because this is your beat, but are you shocked at what you're seeing right now? This is more than normal.
Definitely some alarming trends. And as I mentioned before, the number of young people you've seen, the increasing numbers of 15, 17, 16-year-olds who are being charged with things like carjackings. And we're not just talking about, when we say carjacking, we're talking with weapons, violent thefts. And you look at the number, look at this weekend, a 15-year-old being killed. And so you look at situations just up there in Vaughan where a 2-year-old was killed alongside its mom inside a home where you're supposed to be the most safe. And so you've seen some very startling incidents this year and startling violent crimes. And I think we all have to take time to take stock of this and really see where we are heading as a community and see how we can address these issues.
You mentioned Vaughan. Vaughan is in York Region, so I'll pick up there. York Regional Police released some statistics which included, here we go, 64 carjackings so far this year. That's a 106% increase from last year. 15 homicides in York Region. That's not the York Region of the past that I know. 46 shootings. That's a 92% increase from last year. Is there, in your view, as you look at this, a material difference in the types of crimes happening, say, in the city core versus in the suburbs?
Not at all. And that's one of the things we do see as crime reporters and as journalists out there in the field is that what you hear more and more coming from police is that people are offending or crossing borders. And so the GTA is an open playing field for everyone. And it just comes down to where people are at a certain time is not necessarily dictated by where they're from, right? And so you see people from Toronto going into York and committing offenses and being charged there. And so there's no boundaries at this point, especially when it pertains to things like the tow truck conflict that we've seen in the last few years where people are being attacked at their homes in Vaughan, but the shooters from Toronto. And so there's been a mix of, and you heard that in the conversation from Chief McSween up in York Region last week, where he was saying, listen, we have young people coming from all across the province stealing cars, committing carjackings. We're seeing more and more of that. And so those boundaries no longer kind of exist. They're not hard boundaries, right? And criminality know no bounds as it pertains to that in our city.
Now, I remember, gosh, it was probably 15 or 20 years ago, they called it the summer of the gun because things spiked up for no apparent reason. And here we are again. Is this cyclical as opposed to something special this year?
I think what we have to be most concerned of is the last handful of years that we've experienced coming out of this pandemic. I don't know if it's sparked or driven by that experience that we all went through as humans and what we can make of that. But what I can say is that we're looking back about the year of the gun that you mentioned about 20 or so years ago. And when you draw into focus what we're now seeing, the year-over-year increases are very dramatic, where you see the chief in York Region saying he had a 106% spike over last year this time. Last year, total number of carjackings in York Region was about 58 or 57, give or take. This year, we're already at 64, right? So that gives you a sense.
And the year's not over.
Homicides last year, only about 14 in York Region. They're already at 15 this year. So not to say even what there was last year compared to this year this time, the entire year, we've already passed that number. So very problematic in terms of those increases. You're seeing the same type of increases, but different, much larger numbers in the larger neighbor, which is Toronto, where you and I are sitting right now, where we're in, like say, for example, a PL, a municipality of over 1 million folks. You're seeing about 8,000 plus car thefts. In Toronto, you're seeing about 12,000 plus car thefts, right? But when you add that up, that's 20 plus thousand car thefts, 25,000 car thefts in 2 municipalities alone. And so that is very telling that it's a wave that's touching every community. And when you talk about shootings and gun crimes, and police across the region are saying 85%, 90% of these guns are coming in illegally from the state's handguns that we're dealing with. And so everyone's been touched in a similar way. And it's kind of the unfortunate cycle of how criminality is working now, organized crime, where you see some communities like York Region saying about 4 or so groups are fighting for the space. In terms of who controls where and when and how. And that goes to many things, including drugs and other things.
But is that new? These turf wars,
not
is that
at all.
new?
Not at all. But I think there's something to be said about the recent spiral. And you've heard conversation about the free nature of movement of cars through our ports. Did that just start last 3 years? No. Our ports have had issues with resources, issues with technology for a long time. Maybe now, to the degree that they've been tested with the increase in the type of in stolen autos, has exposed that much more, right? So there's definitely some new revelations around some parts of the criminal activity in terms of what I would say is young people being active. Some people will tell you, no, young people have always been committing crimes. Yes, but to be frank with you, I haven't seen the type of numbers in terms of the ages of young people and the degree of violence that I've seen in the last 2 to 3 years. That's definitely changed. I'm very concerned.
So when you ask the police, why is this happening, particularly among young people disproportionately, what answers do you get back?
The allure of the experience of crime. You hear that from both the experts and police who are part of that expert group. The profit that comes from it. Many young people are seeking out the money that comes from walking up to your driveway or walking up to a parking lot and using technology to remove cars that are now easy to steal. People have done their best to protect their autos and they still get removed from your driveway. Some cars have been stolen 2-3 times.
Let me jump in on that though. It's one thing to use one of those remote starters and steal a car at 2 o'clock in the morning out of somebody's driveway. It's another thing for a 16-year-old to put a gun up to somebody's head while they're driving down the street, maybe stopped at a stoplight and say, get out of your car right now or I'm going to blow your brains out. Who does that?
Well, it comes to who's convincing them to participate to begin with and what they're being sold. You and I maybe, been to journalism school and we were taught by certain professors that might influence the style of journalism that we bring to the field. I think that same thing applies, or concept applies to young people. The people who are convincing them to get involved are probably selling them a tale of that, look, when you do get caught for these crimes, this is what happens. This is what has happened to people before you in terms of the minimum sentences. You're a young person, the penalties are lower. It's not going to follow you throughout your life. They've been misled to believe that that is the case, true and true, where in fact, this type of activity can scar you in many different ways, right? You can end up being killed. You can end up killing someone and having to live with that. And so I don't think their understanding of the implications are as clear as they need to be. And how do we counter that? How do we talk to our young people who are more than likely the ones who are highest at risk of committing these kind of acts? How do we connect with them and kind of work with them to try to steer them away from this lifestyle? I think we have a big challenge on our hand as a community, and it goes more than just law enforcement. It comes down to a social context issue that we also have to look at as well.
You mentioned that Toronto and Peel a moment ago are some of the most egregious examples of what we've been talking about. But as you look across the whole Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, is it the same everywhere?
Pretty much.
Pretty much.
Eh? It's unfortunate. Many communities, if you ask the police chiefs and the top brass, the officers on the front lines, it's the same issue, right? And there's been much of a call, you've noticed this, and you might ask this question here at the table, is that you've seen things around like bail reform. What will that do? What will reverse onus do to people's behavior when you have to step up and prove that you should be released versus the Crown proving that you should stay in custody? But I feel it will still come down to the judges and the judges' judgment on whether or not you're a fit candidate for that. How do we manage our release programs from the anchor bracelets and certain types of monitoring? You've seen offenses recently where people simply know that police are closing in and they jump on a flight and leave the country. You've seen offenses where people have ankle monitors and bracelets and they cut them off and they leave. So
how do you cut off an ankle monitor? I thought the whole point was you couldn't.
People do. And there's been cases of people that have been charged for serious offenses here who are, parts unknown. And so our system isn't perfect, and it needs a shake-up. And we need to form solutions here. And I think many of these issues are deeper than we might observe just from the surface. And the organized crime players are getting really adept at kind of like flexing and changing according to the times, where they might allocate some of their attention to certain types of crimes to profit from that for some time. And once police jam into that area and try to snuff them out, they switch the agenda to something else. You've seen that with auto thefts. Where did this spiral come from? Where we went from a couple thousand thefts to now Ontario exceeding 30,000+ thefts in total. I think I was at the Auto Summit, and that was kind of the number, somewhere near 40,000 cars stolen in our community. So organized crime is becoming very smart to the issues. They're right there with us, and that's the unfortunate truth.
I'll pick up on we've talked about auto, but you also mentioned bail here, so let me pick up on both. You said we need new solutions. One of the solutions that Doug Ford, the Premier, thinks he's brought forward is he's appointed a new minister, the guy from Brampton, Graham McGregor, who is in charge of auto theft and bail reform. Now, I see you smiling already. Does that mean that people are not holding out much hope that this is going to create any ripples out there, or what?
No instant solutions. Look at the tow truck industry. That's another, I'm just going to jam that as a sidebar because I think it fits. Where you look at, they've changed regulation. They say, listen, you have to get a criminal record background check. You have to do all of these tests and so forth to now get certified. There's many people in the industry whose livelihood is being cut off because it's going to affect those, right? You have people who might have offenses from the past who are now being told that they no longer qualify. There's all of these things. So there's ripple effects of everything we do, both negative and positive, right? So while it might weed out bad actors that we need to clamp down on, it's also going to affect men and women out there who need to drive tow trucks to earn a living, who might have some form of a troubling past, but haven't been involved in any activity for a long time, and now they're facing the wave of change, right? The same thing with bail reform. I think if you say that we need to keep people inside our jails longer, and we need to keep them there because we're protecting people who are outside, yeah, there's an argument for that. Well, there's also
that's what the Premier says.
But there's a flip side of that coin where you could end up with a situation where someone who is inside a custody, first of all, it's not going to cost us any less, so we're all going to have to pay for this somehow. Incarceration costs just as much as monitoring someone who's out on bail, and maybe even more if we were to check the numbers. Don't quote me on that. But where we go and look at this and say it is the solution, situation. There's, as Chief of Peel always says, we just cannot see it as a panacea for this problem. Bail reform will not fix our problems. It might cause an ebb of the flow of violence, where some people might consider before they do certain things because they know that it will be harder for them to be released. But I think some of the people who are stone cold hard criminals will continue to commit these crimes.
Well, I've seen this Graham McGregor, the new minister for auto theft and bail reform. I've seen him give speeches in which he says, you watch out, we're coming for you. Now, does the street think that this guy's legit, or is more bark and not too much bite?
I would say the streets don't even know who that guy is. The people who know who that person is are the people who might vote, or the people who pay attention, like yourself and me. Outside of that, activities on the ground level in terms of operations and people, we see last week coming out of the York region, increases. What does that tell us? The bad actors, the people who carry out this kind of activity aren't paying attention. If anything, they're activated and escalated.
Okay, in our last couple of minutes here, when I talk to people about this kind of thing, I hear people say it's post-COVID malaise, it's, economy, which is tough for too many people, it's social media, which puts all of these issues on steroids and jacks people up. Mm-hmm. How accurate is all of that from your travels?
It's all in the bag, isn't it? I think it all plays. We cannot discount any of those things that you mentioned. I think they all have a role to play. We've heard of young people seeing things and wanting to be a part of it and joining groups where they feel they belong because of that social atmosphere. You've seen situations where the hardships that you and I and many of us in this room and across this country faced during the COVID pandemic have left some ripple effects, some scars there, and some people are trying to recover from that, both financially and socially in many respects. So I think when we sit down and we start looking at the issues, that we could sit in a hot button room and just keep listing them. They're there. And I think as a community, we do know what some of these are. And the problem is that from a government perspective, there's no quick fix. They have tried with many legislative changes, from the tow truck legislation to bail reform legislation, and those are coming down the pipeline. And I did ask the chief, have you seen the effects of this on the front line? And he said, listen, we welcome them. They're coming on board, but we're still seeing these increases.
That's Jason Miller. He's the crime reporter for the Toronto Star for his first, but surely not his last appearance here on the agenda. Jason, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Before 2 Apollo missions went to the moon, the astronauts had to first come to Northern Ontario. There was an important scientific purpose to bringing them here, and it all has to do with this city's connection to the stars above. Welcome back to Sudbury, Ontario. Superstar Chris Hadfield once referred to Sudbury as, quote, that big smear. He was referring to the way the city looks from above, and it's actually a pretty fitting description. About 1.85 billion years ago, a meteorite smashed into what's now Sudbury. It created the Sudbury Basin, the third largest known impact structure in the world. At the same time, it also made Sudbury one of the richest mineral areas on Earth. For a while, there was no hard evidence that a meteorite had caused this formation. It was so old that much of it had eroded. But there were a few key features that would ultimately prove the theory. And as strange as it may sound, that whole mystery began to unravel right here behind this very hotel.
I'm David Pearson. I was a professor at Laurentian University until just a couple of years ago. And for the first 30 years that I was at Laurentian, I taught geology. Back in May of 1963, a geologist called Bob Dietz came up from the United States, and he looked at the geological map of Sudbury, the Sudbury area, and said, this is a meteorite impact crater. Around those craters, there were what are called shatter cones, that is, cone-shaped fractures, a bit like sort of half of an ice cream cone with a point at one end, and they came from the shock wave that caused the crater, the shock wave of an asteroid, a meteorite hitting the Earth. He got a taxi at Sudbury Airport. He came to the Holiday Inn here, and in the headlights of the taxi, before he'd even got out of the car, He said, "Whoa, those are shadow cones." That was the very first piece of evidence that Sudbury was the result of a meteorite impact and not a volcanic explosion, which was the current interpretation at the time.
After Sudbury became known as a confirmed impact crater, other geological features began to stand out. One of these was breccias, and that's what led NASA to take an interest in this place.
What has happened on the moon is that surface rocks, and rocks probably down to 10 or 15 kilometers deep, have in fact been broken by the shock waves that caused sides of those fractures to rub together, and for fragments that came from the sides to be rounded like boulders to make what we call Sudbury breccia. And that was one of the main reasons that they came to Sudbury, so that they could see and say, this is breccia, this is like Sudbury breccia.
In 1971, the future crew of Apollo 16 came to Sudbury with a small team from NASA. The following year, the Apollo 17 crew would do the exact same. The moon is well known for having a surface that's covered in all sorts of craters, so by first studying a known impact crater here on Earth, the astronauts might have a better idea of what to expect on the lunar surface. INCO geologists took the astronauts around the city. They visited some of the best examples of impact crater features in the area. It was quite a sight. The Apollo 16 crews used radios to talk with a sort of mission control. It was meant to help simulate the conditions they would face on the moon. A small team of people from Sudbury supported the training, and as it turns out, we already met one of the team members.
I was with the Apollo 17 crew, with Jack Schmidt and Gene Cernan, the last two astronauts to visit the moon. And I was there partly as a local geologist to add a little bit of information here and there.
The astronauts learned a lot on their field trips to Sudbury, and they didn't forget this place when they got into space.
Charlie described this boulder right here. It looks like a Sudbury breccia, and that's the truth. I can't believe it.
Less than 10 years after the NASA training, Sudbury began its regreening program. There's dozens of photos of the astronauts on barren, rocky hilltops like the one that used to stand behind me before this area became a forest once again. Because of all those changes, it's become really hard to figure out where the photos were originally taken. Lucky for me, though, I don't have to do that work.
Remembering how exciting it was to be with the Apollo 17 astronauts when they came to Sudbury, I thought I must find all the photographs that exist that I can get my hands on about not only the Apollo 17 but the Apollo 16 crew who came here. And I found those photographs, and I found a spot where I can be absolutely sure that Charlie Duke and John Young stood and began to talk geology. So let's go and have a look.
It is incredible to be able to revisit these same training sites more than 50 years later. Many of them are on private property, but there are a few, like here at Onaping High Falls, where anybody can retrace the footsteps of the astronauts. These training missions were really interesting on their own, but they also represent a bigger shift, the transformation of Sudbury into a place of great scientific research.
It gave people thoughts about other parts of the landscape, the lakes, the history of the lakes, the impact of industry. It led to many, many threads of science research that probably would not have taken place if we'd just been an ordinary community with an ordinary history. We're not. We're an extraordinary community with an extraordinary history.
We previously learned about Sudbury's regreening program, a world-class industry-led project to repair environmental damage. There's also been plenty of innovation here within the mining sector, and Sudbury is also home to a major physics research lab 2 kilometers underground. Sudbury is well known within the scientific community, but it's stories like the NASA training that have stayed with the people of this city.
My name is Todd Thomas. I live here on Kelly Lake, and right now I'm sitting on the rock that the Apollo 16 astronauts sat when they were in Sudbury. Well, I've lived here for over 35 years, and it's special to me. I'm a flyboy. I love flying. I love anything that has to do with it. And having to be able to sit, and I'm sitting on the rock, for the Apollo astronauts. That means a lot to me. And this rock will not be disturbed. We're going to keep it for as long as I'm living with no development on it, because it's a piece of history.
So we have a few old photos, stories of astronauts on the rocks, and a bunch of overgrown training sites. Why talk about all this now? After all, the last time a person set foot on the moon was more than half a century ago. Well, Sudbury's role in training astronauts might not be over.
Dr. Gordon Osinski. I'm a professor in the Department of Earth Sciences here at the University of Western Ontario. For a decade now, I've been teaching an impact cratering field school there every other year in September. And that has had support through NASA Survey. And they would fund a bunch, sometimes up to 15 US students, grad students, postdocs, to come up to Sudbury and gain experience for the very same reasons, I just outlined. It's a big crater, learn about cratering processes, go out into the field and see these rocks. When we go to the moon, a big priority, for example, is the South Paikin Basin, figuring out if there was a late heavy bombardment on the moon, age dating in the early part of the solar system. And for that, we need to date impacts. And for that, we need impact melt. And for that, we need astronauts to know how to recognize it. So therefore, Sudbury makes a really ideal candidate. I'm pushing NASA and the CSA that we should start bringing astronauts back to Sudbury, but it hasn't happened quite yet.
The Apollo missions would not have been as successful if it weren't for the training here in Sudbury. And they're a part of why this city is known for scientific excellence to this day. The coming decades are going to bring major growth for space exploration, and Northern Ontario is already a part of that new era. It might be too early to say what Sudbury's role will be this time around, but whether it's out in space or a little closer to home, this city certainly has a lot more to teach us. For that, it's earned its place in the universe's living history.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, September 4th, 2024. The 40th anniversary, incidentally, of Brian Mulroney's winning the biggest majority government in Canadian history. Is the temporary foreign worker program working for Canada? Well, tomorrow we'll debate what the federal government's changes to the program mean for you. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at TVO.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
Always looking for more about what's going on at Queen's Park? Nerd Out with Steve Paikin and John Michael McGrath and the On Poly podcast. Fridays on the agenda, anytime on TVO.org or the podcast platform of your choice. The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.